Welcome back to Mr. Wicklam's virtual classroom, where today what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at relating fractions to decimals. So what we're going to do is we're just going to, hopefully this works, take a look at this flower garden that's here, okay? And we want to kind of take a look at what's been planted in here. So if we take a look at the roses, for instance, what space of the garden do the roses take up? Okay, and so when we look at it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is a 10 by 10 grid, which means that there's 100 squares in this grid. Okay, so if I want to know how many the roses are taken up, well, I can do the area. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what is 5 times 5? That's 25. So it's taking up 25 of 100 spaces in the garden, right? And so 25 of 100 spaces is actually 25% or 1/4. And so you can see how I came to that conclusion. 5 times 5 is 25. And then I wrote a decimal because we're relating our fractions to a decimal. And so 25 over 100, whenever we divide, we move the decimal 2 places to the left, and I get decimal 25. Now, tulips were the same. And so if the tulips were the same, 25 out of 100, I move my decimal 2 places to the left, and I get the same thing. Now, the lilies, on the other hand, let's take a look at the lilies. The lilies are right here. And so you can't really see it. It's a dark brown, but there's 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the area is 3 times 10 for the lilies. So let's do that. 3 times 10. Well, what is 3 times 10? 3 times 10 is 30 out of 100. So the lilies take up 30 spots out of 100. Well, what is that as a decimal? As a decimal, it equals decimal 0, 3, 0, or 0.30. The reason I say that is because I have my tenths here, and here's my hundredths, right? And these are measured in hundredths. That's why we need to go to the 2 decimal places. So now what about the daisies? Well, take a look here. Here's my daisies, 1, 2, and then it's taking up 10. So then 2 times 10, which is 20 over 100, okay? And the decimal for that is 0.20, tenths, hundredths. That's why we need to do that. So basically what we do is when you want to take a fraction and put it into a decimal, as I said at the top, you can take all fractions and you can turn it into a decimal if you divide the numerator by the denominator. So by dividing the numerator by the denominator, if I take 3, and if you did this on a calculator, 3 divided by 4, that's going to give us decimal 75. So anytime that I divide a fraction, I'm going to turn it into a decimal. Okay, that's what we need to know. Fractions and decimals go hand in hand, and you're going to get an equivalent decimal because the equal sign that's there, it's got to be equal. It's got to be equivalent. Okay, so what if I do a division of 10? Well, if I do a division of 10, I only need to go 1 space past the decimal because that's my tenths. So let's say I have 3 over 10. Well, that's going to equal 0.3. There's my whole number right here, and here's my tenth, right? That's why I put the decimal in between, because a tenth is less than a whole, right? And that's what this is. A fraction is usually less than 1, okay? So that's why we do that. Now, what if I have a division of 100? So I have 15 over 100. Well, my whole is going to be 0, Okay, tenths, well, I have 1/10. And what about hundreds? Well, hundreds, I have 5. So what I have is I have 0.15. Now, look at this fraction. We've seen these fractions before. This is not a proper fraction. Proper fraction is when it's less than the denominator. This is more than the denominator. So if something was out of 100, that would mean we would have 125 pieces. So we'd actually have 25 more than one whole. So in that case, if I have more, I have one whole as represented because I have more than 100. Then I would have a decimal, and my decimal would be 2/5. So I would have 1.25. Okay, so that's how I would write something if it's more than a whole. Right? You've seen mixed. This is an improper fraction. You've seen a mixed number where it might be 1 and 25 over 100. Okay, and then this is how we would write that as a decimal. 1.25. All right. So what we're going to do next is we're just going to take a look at the shaded spots. Okay. So let's take a look at our shaded area. And if you take a look here, you'll notice that I have 4 groups. Well, how many are shaded? So you would say 3 of 4 are shaded. And you're correct. Now, if you take a look at this a little more closely, and you notice I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is a 10 by 10 grid, which means there's 100 squares in there. So then, how many would be shaded out of 100? So each of these are a quarter. A quarter, as we know in money, would be 25. So if we count up by 25s, 25, 50, 75. So I would have 75 of 100. Okay, that's the equivalent fraction. And then what would that be as a decimal? Well, that would be 0, because I take a look, I don't have more than 100, so I have 0 wholes, and I have decimal 75. Okay, now let's take a look at our next one. Take a look at the one we have down here. All right, so I have 1 whole. Would you agree that I have 1 whole? And then what do I have here? 1, 2, and I would have 2/5. So I would have 1 whole, and I would have 2/5. Now, if I was to separate this out further, and I was to take a line, and I would just go up here, and all of a sudden, I've split this into how many groups? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Because we always want to try and get our fractions to 10 or 100. It just makes it that much easier. I still have 1 whole. Now all of a sudden I have 4 of 10 shaded in, which, by the way, is equivalent, because if I multiply by 2 from the top and the bottom, 5 times 2 is 10, 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, so what we did is we just made an equivalent fraction. Now, if I have 1 4/10, how would I put that as a decimal? Well, obviously I have 1 whole right here. Now, how would I write the 4? Okay, so it's 10. So I only want to go to my tenths place because that's all I'm dealing with. So I would have 1.4. Okay, and so that's how we can relate fractions to decimals, because they really do. If I was to divide 4 by 10, I would do 4 divided by 10, I would get decimal 4, right? So fractions and decimals do relate even more than we really realize, okay? And that's why I said we want to get our denominator to 10 or 100, and if it's not, we need to find the equivalent fraction. So what about this? Right right now, as it stands, I would have 3/5, correct? Well, how could I get that to 10? How can I make that equivalent? So some of you might say, well, Mr. Wicklund, if I just multiply by 2, okay, or if I just cut this in half. Now all of a sudden I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of 10. So what is the decimal place? How much have I filled it is the question. Well, I haven't filled it full, so I don't have a whole, but I have 0.6 because remember, 10th, I only want to go to the 10th place value, so it'll be 0.6. So as I said to the bottom, try to get your denominator to 10 or 100, and you'll have a much easier time trying to relate fractions to decimals. Okay, and so for your practice, I'll put it up on Google Classroom. There's not going to be much for you to do, a few questions, but I have a feeling that you can do it as long as we're realizing our place value. Place value really does matter. I've told you this, and I've told you this, and I've told you this, but you need to know your tenths and your hundreds, and you need to be able to relate the fractions to the tenths and the hundreds. Okay, so if it's 100, it's 2 places past the decimal. If it's 10, it's 1 place past the decimal because of the tenths, and the hundreds. Okay, I will put your practice up on Google Classroom. I hope you have a great day. Remember, I will be live from 11 to 1, and I just hope that you have a good time. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Have a good day.